Thank you for this presentation. As you may hear and see, I'm going to speak in English. And I will try to speak as clearly as possible. And I must also tell you that besides being an associate professor at the Danish School of Education, I'm also a research coordinator of Play Art, which is a project, again, a brand new project in Denmark. It's called Legekunst in Danish. And it's actually a national project. And it's about promoting play and art, play and Bildung through art and culture. And it includes 5 university colleges, 1 university in Denmark. So it's quite huge, and we really are quite excited about this. It just started last week, and we really hope to make a difference. So it's what I'm going to talk about: play, creativity, and Bildung in the digital age, and it's my research area, you might say. But I must confess that I've never spoken to a German audience before, so I'm a bit excited how you react here. Okay. Well, one of the main arguments for why digital technologies and media is relevant in kindergarten is that it is important for children to understand digital technologies and to use them creatively, as we just heard. They have to be makers, right? But what is not that clear is why this is so important, or how one promotes creativity in children. And these 2 questions actually opens up bigger questions. Actually, I think the biggest question for education, which is, what is important to learn in the future? And this question has always been important for education. But it's becoming more and more important today because things are changing more and more quickly. And today, researchers talk about that there is an intensified race against the machine. Now, there's always been a race between technology on the one side and education on the other. You have technology which replaces workers by automation. And then you have more and more education so that the workers can solve more complex tasks. And this has been going on for the last 200 years. And the result is that we are more and more educated and have more and more interesting jobs and so on. But researchers worry that technology is developing too fast, are getting too smart too quickly, so that they are winning this race against education. So what is really important is to ask, what is it that the machines cannot do? And researchers seem to agree that we have never seen a machine who is truly creative, who is truly innovative, who's really created something new. And what is even more, they point to that it's not only being creative, it's also about using machines creatively. That is, and not only use them, but also cooperate with them, like they were, co-workers. And the point is here that today it's not only about racing against the machines, but also about racing with the machines. They're not just our enemies. They are taking our jobs, but we have to work with them too. So that's the point that I will try to explore here in my presentation. Okay, so it's important then, if this is right, then it's important to know, how do we promote creativity in education? How do we promote this kind of cooperation? And when we talk about the kindergarten, and that would be my focus, because this is where it all starts, but it continues. But then we have to ask the question, what is creativity in kindergarten? And how do we promote creativity and cooperation in kindergarten? And my point of departure is that play is children's way of being creative. And that is perhaps not too surprising. I hope not. But it's very, very important. And it's important to understand this. Because if play is children's way of being creative, then we have to focus on play. If children are going to meet the challenges of the society of tomorrow. All right. And the second question is, if we have to promote creativity, then what is creativity? And that is my second point that I will try to argue for here in my presentation. And that is that in my research, I've argued for that creativity is, in fact, a question of Bildung. It is not a competence. Usually, if you look in OECD and in the research literature, today, when we talk about creativity, people talk about it as a competence, as an ability people have. But I say, no, it's actually different. It's a question of Bildung. And you may wonder, why am I using a German word right now? Well, I'm using a German word because there is no word for it in English. Actually, when I write research papers, I use the German word Bildung in an English text. It's close to formation of the personality. It's close to cultivation of the person and so on. But it's not exactly. So that is why it's common to use Bildung, the German concept. But when we use the German concept, it is different from what it normally means in German. I'm sorry. In German, it's, as you know, a very general concept, right? But when we use it in English, it's a more specific concept. It refers to the neo-humanistic concept of Bildung. And I will come back to that, what's in that concept there. All right, this was just to introduce what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so why is technology winning today? Well, researchers point to that we have seen some advances in artificial intelligence. And especially the last 10 to 20 years, we have seen some great advances in what they call machine learning or deep learning. And what is new is that before that, you should code a program if you want the program to solve a problem. But today, you have problems that learns by themselves. The only thing that you have to do is to present a lot of data for these programs. For instance, self-driving cars. What you do, you have a program that learns as you drive with it. So you drive with it they've been driving for it for 5 or 6 years now in California. And then the machine learns for itself. When it is a red light, you stop, or you usually stop, right? And they have made remarkable progress in, of course, voice recognition, diagnosing cancer. Chess was one of the first places where Kasparov, the world champion, was beaten by a supercomputer, and so on. It's extremely effective, this artificial intelligence. And then researchers have tried to inquire into what happens to the labor market in the future if these kind of machines take over our jobs. And there are two very interesting guys, Frey and Osborne, two Oxford researchers, and they claim through their research that almost half of the jobs we have today are in high risk of being automated, of being replaced by robots and computers in the next 10 to 20 years. Now, if that happens, that means that when our children, our pupils, are going into, are adults and are going to work, it will be a completely different society and labor market. I cannot imagine that the labor market will transform that quickly, but it's a possibility and it's going that way. So we have to somehow do something. And what they say is that these are not just blue-collar jobs. These are just not manual jobs. It's also white-collar jobs. It's lawyers, accountants, and so on. So it's even jobs that require a college education who are being automated. And there are some other researchers that say that If we have the data on how to do a job, the job can be automated. So they say there's no boundaries. Again, perhaps there are boundaries. Frey and Osborne point to, again, that there is certain tasks that it seems that computers are not very good at. It is, as I mentioned before, being creative, being innovative on the one hand. On the other hand, it is any tasks that require social intelligence. Now, computers are very bad at reading people, dealing with people. They're very bad at practical judgment in a situation, and so on. So jobs that require creativity and social intelligence should be relatively secure. I don't know, what do you think about kindergarten teachers then? You'll stay? And not only that, kindergarten teachers are actually some of the most secure jobs we have. I've never, heard a teacher organization promote their jobs with that kind of argument, but you could. It seems that these are some of the last jobs that are going to be automated. Whew, right? Okay. So what characterized then this kind of job in the future? Well, in the future, what is going to be characteristic of perhaps any job is that we will see a lot of change. And actually, researchers today talk about that the pace of change is accelerating. It's going faster and faster. It's not just that we occasionally change our way of doing things. Change is going to be like the nature of our job in the future. There's a lot of things that point to this. And one of them is that these new technologies, digital technologies, they are what you call general purpose technologies. And that is that you can use them for all sorts of purposes. You can use them to solve all sorts of tasks, driving, voice recognition, but a lot of tasks that we haven't even dreamt of yet. It's like electricity. When electricity came about 100 years ago, you could use it not just to drive a train, but also in a washing machine, in a television, and so on. So you can use it in a lot of places. So digital technologies make change possible. That's the main point. And that is that the nature of work will shift. In the future, it will be very important to be able to understand change, to be able to handle change, and to be able to make change. And I think that is, in fact, exactly what Maker is about. So I think you're onto something here. Okay, what about machines then and change? Well, I will claim, and have tried to claim in my research, that we have a paradox here, because machines make change possible, but machines cannot make change themselves. They cannot make change. Why? Because, as I said, machines need data, or they need to be programmed with rules. But what happens if we change something? What happens if we change our way of doing things, our way of teaching, for example? Well, if we do that, we have new rules. If we change a game, we have new rules. And if we have new rules, the data of when we play the game will be different. So the very thing that the computer needs is not available when we talk about change. And it's not only me who said that. Actually, Joseph Schumpeter said that 80 years ago. And Joseph Schumpeter is not just anybody. He's one of our great economists. He's actually the guy who coined the concept of innovation. And the problem is that everyone refers to Schumpeter, but very few people have actually read him. And if they had, they would see that he actually states that the entrepreneur, the one who's going to create change, cannot rely on rules and data, he says, because there are no rules and data outside the boundary of routine, of ordinary practice. So, and this is very interesting, he says the entrepreneur has to rely on his human intuition, his intuition of what is important, what is needs to be done, and also his or her will. It's a question of will. It's about saying, I want to do this differently. This kind of teaching could be otherwise. We could make school better. That's what humans can do. That's not what machines can do. So it points to that in the future, all of these kinds of unique human capacities, creativity, intuition, judgment, and so on, will be very, very important. That's one of the things that seems to be important. The other thing that seems to be important are related to the fact that, I've tried to formulate it like this, that machines need human to create change. So it's not that we should be afraid of not having a work, because they will come back to us, because they need us. They cannot do change themselves. And an example of this is actually these MIT researchers who say that a supercomputer can beat the world champion in chess. But if humans have only an ordinary chess computer, they can actually beat the supercomputer. So human plus machine are more effective than super machine. And I think that is a very, very important point. And yeah, it's an argument for your doing here. But it's a very, very important point for everybody in the educational system. Okay, so what are the nature of these human capacities? What is the nature, for example, of creativity? Well, as I started by saying, I think that creativity is not a competence, it is a question of Bildung. So what is the difference between Bildung and competence? And this is, yeah, very, I think I've used 10 years to come up with this slide. So, yeah. So what's the difference? It's quite hard, but let me try to explain. A skill or competence is a concept of being able to do something. If you have a competence, you can perform an act, you can solve a task, or you can handle a challenge, right? And that is, when you have a skill, you can actually formulate goals, educational goals for that skill. When you can read and write, you have this and that skill and competence, for instance. When we talk about Bildung, it's different. Bildung is not about being capable of doing something. Bildung is about becoming human. It's about cultivating your humanity. It's about developing a human personality. And that is to say, Bildung is not about educational goals, being able to read and write. It's about the purpose of education. Why is it important to be able to read and write? Well, it's important because we live in a society where where to read and write is important. It was not important 200 years ago. It was not important at all 6,000 years ago, because that was when we invented reading and writing. Before that, other skills were important. So Bildung is about what human do you have to become in able to live in society and work in society. And what is important also is that you promote skills and Bildung in different ways. Now, you promote skills and competences through learning processes. And that is why we talk about learning all the time today. But Bildung is about changing yourself. It's about changing the way you relate to yourself, changing the way you relate to other people, the way you relate to your homework, to to your work, and so on. And an example of this would be social competences. Because usually, when OECD is talking about things that I would say regard Bildung, they use the concept of social competences. But it's quite interesting how a social competence is defined. It's defined as the competences, the ability to manage social relationships. It's the ability to interact with other people. My point is that you can use this skill for different purposes. If you take bullying, when you bully somebody, that requires sharp social competencies. If you bully somebody, right, you have to know, you have to identify who is the weakest person. And you have to be able to make the others laugh at what you do and be afraid of that they are next. So you really have to have great social competences to be a bully and bully people. But you could use the same social competences to try to understand a person you haven't spoken to, right? To get friends and so on. And that would be a question of Bildung. How do you relate with your knowledge, with your competences to the world, to others, and so on? Okay, now I come to this neo-humanistic concept of Bildung. You might be familiar with it. The neo-humanism it started 200 years ago. It was people like Humboldt, Herder, Schiller, Schlegel, Hegel, a lot of good white dead men, right? And I'm sorry for that, but they said something important that we can use today. And what is quite important is that they talked about how the Bildung process goes on. How do you change a person? How do a person become a human through others? And there are two processes. The first process is the process of transcendence. And they say, and it's a bit abstract, but I will try to illustrate. They say that when you engage in a Bildung process, you transcend your own world and you involve with greater worlds. And this is actually what goes on in an educational journey, or Bildungsreise in German, in the original sense. What goes on in that journey is the same. You start at home, right? You know yourself at home, you know your friends, you know the whole thing. Then you go out, then you travel to a different country. And that is the transcendence. And then you experience something in this foreign land, in this foreign culture. And when you come back, if it is a process of Bildung, you're not quite yourself when you come back. You have changed. Not entirely, that's very seldom, but just a little bit. You have had another perspective on yourself, on things, on other cultures. And that is the experience. Good. That's the one process. The other process is about developing judgment, developing taste. And that is because it's not only about changing yourself, it's about changing yourself to something better. And that is, you always have an idol for what kind of human am I going to be? And there are also always concrete idols who are examples of that. Okay, if we take the neo-humanists, their idea, their idol was that you should become more human. They had this concept of you should become universally human. And that is extremely abstract. They talked about humanity and human rights and so on, and they actually had quite difficulty to point out what that was. But they all agreed about who were exemplary for being human. And to the neo-humanistics, that was a very easy question. If you want to become human, you should look to the ancient Greek, right? Look to the ancient Greek. They know about how to be human, how to be with others, how to engage with the world, and so on. Okay, this is also a hint. You might see that, there's a lot that has happened the last 200 years. It's impossible today to say to students, the only way to become a human is to engage with the old Greeks. You have to learn Greek. And they say, hey, come on. Please, don't disturb me. I'm hearing music. So one of the things that has happened today is that you cannot point to one idol or one ideal that is universal. This has been individualized today. Today, we prefer to choose our own idols, our own ideas of which humans should we want to be. And I think that is why Bildung, the concept of Bildung, is coming back. Because it's not just a socialization process where society knows who you are going to be. It is yourself, because there is a freedom in Bildung. You are free to choose for yourself who to listen to, where to go on journey, and so on. Okay, so there's something very important, I think, in this original concept of Bildung. On the other hand, it is very abstract too. So in my own research, I've tried to make it more concrete, and I've tried to say, can we identify certain stages in the Bildung process? And my answer would be yes. There are 4+1 stages. And the first stage is maybe not a part of the process, but it's a stage that goes before. And it's about the occasion. Often when you are going into a Bildung process, there is an occasion for it. And the occasion is typically that you have a sense that you have been missing out of something. And one of the most banal examples is that you hear your friends talking about a book they've read. And usually you don't read that book, or you don't watch that series on Netflix. But they keep on talking about it. And then you have this sense, am I missing something? Usually, you're not into fantasy and that stuff and the Middle Age. But they keep talking about Game of Thrones, right? It's exciting, it's amazing. And at last, you say, okay, maybe I'm missing something. And you see it, and you don't go to work a week. Okay, that's the occasion. And then the first stage is actually what I'm talking about now. It is that usually you say, no, it's not me. No, I don't do that. But you hold back that no. And you say, okay, I'll try it out. I'll do it. And I think we can see it in children when they play games that they not usually play. Or they take on roles that they do not usually take on when they are playing. All right. Klax, the great German Bildungs theorist, he talks about this stage as the individual opens up for the world. And he says that when that happens, the world opens up for the individual. And according to Klax, this is a metaphor. He called it the double opening. To me, the second opening is actually a second stage. It is an actual stage. And it's the stage where you experience, the world is bigger than I thought. And when we have that experience, we usually are quite enthusiastic about it. And we have this, we come in this mood of enthusiasm exactly when we discover that things are different in a positive way than we believed before. Now, if it is a Bildungsreise, the next stage emerges, and that's the stage of experience. And in fact, it is the same stage as the second stage, but it is when this experience that the world is bigger, when it touches us, when it's not just, and you would say in German, an Erlebnis, but it is in fact an Erfahrung. So it's not just entertaining, oh, things are different, it's nice and so on, but it touches you, right? That's the experience. And the touch is that you experience, wow, things are different. I am into fantasy. Or something exciting is going on. And a sign of this in the Bildung process is that the mood shifts from enthusiasm to disturbance. Now, disturbance is also an experience or a feeling that the world is greater. But it's the same experience, but in a threatening way. It is that, I thought I knew what the world was, but I don't anymore. I thought I knew who I am, but I'm not. And when we experience that, we also lose our words. Because usually we have words we have this story going on, this autobiography. I am this and that. I'm a teacher, and I'm a teacher because of this, and then I did something else a few years and so on. But when we have this experience that the world is different, we also lose our words. So a third sign is that we try to put new words on what happened. And usually we do that with friends and colleagues and so on. Or a child say, I'm a samurai, because he or she had seen a samurai, and he wants to be that in his pretend play, right? And he repeats that over and over again. That would be a parallel to that in play. Okay, good. Okay, how can we understand this further then? If creativity is in fact a kind of Bildung, and creativity is a kind of key way of understanding these human capacities, which are going to be important in the future, then how are we to understand creativity as Bildung? Well, the interesting thing about creativity, when you look it up in research, is that everybody agrees on how to define the creative product, but not the creative process. Everybody agrees that a creative product, a new creative idea, has to be new, but not only new, it also has to be relevant. Or it has to be new and appropriate, new and valuable, and so on. But when it comes to the process that leads to this creative product, then there are disagreement, and many researchers simply don't address this question. I think one of those who really have tried to answer it in a very interesting way is Arthur Koestler, who are also one of our great authors, Cold War authors. And he says that the difference between ordinary thinking and creative thinking is that they are both ways of combining. When you think, you combine things. When I talk, I combine words into meaning. But the difference between creativity and what I'm doing right now is that in ordinary thinking, you combine elements from within the same context, within the same domain. Whereas in creative thinking, you combine elements from different contexts and different domains. This can be illustrated very concretely by a joke. Not only every joke, but all humor. Koestler is also the father of humor research. And he says that humor is, in fact, one of the great ways of being creative. And what is interesting about humor is that it is very obvious what creativity is in humor. So, if it's all right, I will present a joke for you to illustrate. Yes? Okay. I found these on the internet, because usually I use Danish jokes. So please bear with me here. Okay. There's a doctor and a patient. And the doctor says to the patient, "You're very sick." The patient, "Can I have a second opinion?" Doctor, "Yes, you are very ugly too." You got it. I know, because you laughed. Great. What is going on in this very, very simple joke that children, it's like the jokes children like to say, right? Well, what's going on is that you have two elements. You have two elements that have a similarity. And the similarity is opinion, a second opinion. But it is in two different contexts. You have the second opinion of a doctor giving you a second opinion, you go to another doctor to be sure, or you have the second opinion of a person which has a lot of opinions for you. And this is what creativity is all about. It's simply about combining elements from two different contexts or domains. And what Koestler also says is that there are different types of creativity. What we just talked about, the joke, this is a kind where you combine elements, but in a way in which they collide, right? You say, he said, second opinion, and you say, you're ugly. That's a collision. That is, you see that there is a similarity, but it is absurd. So you laugh, and then creativity is over. So usually, if you're funny, you have a series of jokes. Good. In art, we have a different form. We have not a collision, but a confrontation. And that is, you have different elements of expression that do not fit together. They come from this different contexts, and then you hold them together, and it has meaning, but it doesn't. I don't know that feeling when you're seeing art. It fits. No, it don't. And you can stand there for hours, and it doesn't fit, right? That's art. That's when you have an expression. And then you have what is usually in research, you have a new idea. On politics, you have a new idea. And that is when you combine elements and fuse them so they are together. What about play? Koestler doesn't talk about play. We all know that play is children's way of being creative. Which type of creativity is play? Any suggestion? Sorry?
Creative thinking.
Yeah?
They mix, for example, Lego and dolls, or Lego and
Yeah.
dinosaurs.
So what is that a joke then? Is it an expression or an idea? Yeah, right? It could be a mixture. Playing with Lego could both be, I have an idea of what this should be, but it could only be a way of expressing yourself. And usually, and this is a core in play, that it's joyful. You're enjoying yourself. So actually quite typically, play is a mixture of these three. And to me, this is an indication that play is the original source of any kind of creativity. So if it's important to be creative in the future, we really have to be sure that children are allowed to play and are inspired to play, and that we promote play here. Okay, then I said that the next question is how to promote creativity then. And my suggestion is that we can look at creativity as a process of Bildung. Because if we do that, we also have tools, we have ideas to how to promote it. Okay, you can actually see creativity as a process of transcendence. Because when you combine elements, you transgress, you transcend the domains when you put together elements that are different. And also in creativity, you have this shift in mood. You go from, things doesn't add up, how can I solve that problem? Or a painter trying a lot on the canvas, and it doesn't fit, right? And all of a sudden, there is this new idea. And the old saying for this is, Eureka, oh, I got it. The new idea, the light bulb lighted. The lightning struck me, and so on. Or you are in a process of flow, as Csikszentmihalyi, the creativity researcher, has pointed to. Okay, that's the one process. The next process is the process of judgment. And that's about finding out which new combination is in fact relevant. And this is the great problem. You can get a computer to make hundreds, millions of new combinations. But what the computer cannot is figure out which combination is relevant. And this is very obvious when you try to get a computer to make jokes. They make a lot of jokes, but most of them are boring. And you actually need a human to identify the interesting ones. And how do you identify an interesting joke? You laugh. It's so banal, right? You laugh. Well, I think it's the only kind of creativity where this process of judgment is actually having a physical expression in laughter. But this is what we're after. So this is the one way to look at it, as a building process. The other way is to say that creativity is a special way to relate to the world, to relate to yourself. And that is to being creative, and this is actually one of my research theses, is to relate in a way in which you are open to new ideas, open to new people, open to the situation. It's not about having certain skills or certain competences. Of course, you have to know, you have to have knowledge, you have to have skills within the area of which you want to be creative. But the difference, if you're creative or not, is are you open or are you not open? And I think this is actually what is this childish element of creativity. Howard Gardner points to that creative people are often very childish, in fact. You maybe remember Einstein putting out his tongue and so on, Nick? And Steve Hawking's doing jokes and so on. And this childish approach, where you are naive in the best sense of it, where you keep asking questions, where you keep following a lead, where everyone else will say, "Oh, don't matter. It's probably nothing." "Oh, it is," and then you go on. And what is quite interesting here is that one of the greatest signs, I think, of creativity is these special kinds of moods. And I think it's important to know that moods matter. Moods are ways in which we find ourselves in the world. Actually, Heidegger was the first to talk about this. Moods are ways in which the world are revealed to us. And we can be in the world in different ways. And being creative is to be in the world in an open manner. And when we are that, we are enthusiastic, we are cheerful, or we are in disturbance. Okay, now we're going to talk about what about children's way of being creative. Well, the first thing you might notice is that play, creativity, and Bildung has the same characteristics. They are very similar in nature. They all require freedom. They all are joyful. It's important that you are joyful when you are creative and play and so on. And they are all their own end. That is, you play for the sake of playing. You don't play for the sake of learning. You can do that. It's quite effective. But it's something different. You won't be creative that way, I will say. You won't get builded that way. All right. One of the strongest ways of creativity we find actually in pretend play. Right? When children pretend that reality is different, and this is their way of transgressing reality. And they do that a lot, especially when they're 3 to 5 years old. They're really into it. They love it. And the way they play, I think, actually resembles humor in many ways. But in humor, it's only language, right? When I told the joke, I compared two words or two concepts from different contexts. When children are playing, they usually take a concept and they take themselves, or they take a toy or a thing, and they say, this stick is a horse. And then, now this is a collision. It's absurd to say, but it's very joyful. And when you're in the collision, you have this play universe and you play on. Okay, and I think that play is not only the source of creativity. It's also the way that children are cultivating themselves as human beings, both as a bodily being in the world. They experience how it is to be a bodily being in a physical world, and they do that through sensory motor play, through physical play, and so on. They experience to be a social being when they play with others, where they pretend play with others. And I really think that, pretend play is really a way to cultivate yourself as a person. Because what you do in pretend play is that you pretend, usually, that you're somebody else. You pretend that you're a samurai, or Spider-Man, or the big girl, or something like that. And you do that together with your friends who also pretend to be others. And you do that in an imaginary world that you have created together. So pretend play is not just about developing social competences. It is, in fact, the very way to be a human being. And that's quite, I think, quite important. Yes. All right. So the problem is that today, so what I've been arguing is that play is very important for Bildung, for creativity and play. The problem is today that many people worry that play is actually under threat. Children has always been playing, and today play is important, but it's under threat. And what they say is that children play less today than they used to. There's less playtime because we plan for children. There are the new medias, and maybe they don't play, but only play games. They don't involve in creative play. And toys are different. Lego, for example, are not just simple blocks to put together. They are models to be assembled. And usually what happens is that children put them up and don't play with them. So that's a problem. Okay, my last slide here. How do we promote play then? Well, freedom is important, but it should be the right kind of freedom. It's not a freedom from adults. It's not so that adults should let let children play alone, and that could be structure and planning. But freedom means that you are free to play for the sake of playing, and that is when you play with children, it should be open what you should play. It should be open what is to be learned when you play. That is freedom. And of course, you should have time and space. It's a spontaneous process. And the way to play in a Bildung perspective is actually that you should take children on educational journeys. You should open up greater worlds. You should show them different worlds. And you could do that by sharing your enthusiasm for technology, for culture, and so on. And you do it also by presenting a particular way of relating to things. It's important that kindergarten teachers relate in an open manner, in a playful manner, that they have the courage to experiment, to be silly, to be foolish, to put themselves at play. Okay, my very last slide then. How do you promote digital? How do you promote then play and creativity with digital technologies and media? Well, it's the same as I just told you before, but now in regard to digital technologies and media. You should be free to experiment. And I think it's very important that you can use technologies in unintended ways, that you can take technologies apart. In fact, that is typically what the creative innovators of our time have done. Like Steve Jobs, he totally wrecked his Walkman because he wanted to know what was inside of it. You have to have time and space, and I think that you should not talk about only 1 hour per day on the iPad. A half an hour could be dangerous if it's the wrong way, right? But 4 hours can be good if it's active, if it's creative, and so on. And of course, the way to take on journeys in this respect would be to open up worlds of technology for children, which they can use in their play, and present ways of using technologies creatively, experimenting, designing prototypes, and so on and so forth. That is very, very important. And I know this is what you're doing. So I'm simply saying what you're doing is important. Thank you.